Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Communications and Conversations. We're coming to you a little bit later this week, but we have a legitimate reason. I had family time. That's right. I had family time. I've been working on some other projects too. So I've been a little bit busy in the shack here and everything like that. So we looked and we said, we got a lot of good feedback on the last episodes of the, Pi Star and WPSD. We had a comment. We don't know where that comment went. It was there, but it was gone. And I had another person reach out to me and saying, basically said it was like saying it was all wrong. We don't know what we were talking about. We were talking about on the last few weeks episodes, we were talking about Pi Star and WPSD, and we're doing it from the 10,000 foot view. It was not designed or intended in any way, shape, or form to be a full-fledged, in-depth operation of it. It was designed to be somewhat of a, here's the deal. We got it up and running. We got this, we got this. That was it, right? That was it. It wasn't a deep dive into it in any way, shape, or form. Kind of felt like it was. The biggest thing on there was just to make sure that people understand how to set up your offsets, your bit error rates on there. Bit error rates are what's going to kill you, folks, when you're using these devices. Hands down, that's what's going to kill you. It's going to cause your radios to not function properly, and then upon not functioning properly, you're going to experience upset. You're going to be upset. It's all across the board, right? So that's what these were kind of designed to set up for. Now, today is sort of like part 3 of sort of an informal 3-part series, almost a 4-part series. We talked about hotspots. We talked about software, the OS. Now we're talking about the actual devices themselves, the actual hotspot boards and stuff, because there's a few different type of ones that are out there. So without further ado, we are coming to the end of this series, and we're kind of excited about it because our sponsor, JJK Communications, they are actually now selling what we would call a duplex or dual antenna hotspot device. So with that being said, let's take a minute and talk about our sponsor, JJK Communications. So JJK Communications is your connection to quality communications. That's right. They not only offer sales, service, and rental of two-way radio equipment and supplies, they also offer accessories and other different devices. An example here in this case is their new duplex hotspot product line that not only takes care of amateur but commercial customers too, and a wide variety of different services on there. You want a high quality device, you want something that you're going to get the support on. That's where JJK Communications comes in. JJK also offers their JJK Elite system. That's right, the JJK Elite two-way radio system using push-to-talk over cellular. You know what? Two-way radios, they do have a limited range. If you're talking simplex to simplex or radio to radio, you're going to maybe get outside in there. You're going to get maybe a mile or two. You talk to a repeater or the JJK Connect system, you're going to widen that range. However, you need to talk across the entire United States. Guess what? The JJK Elite service does that. What's different than all these other radios that can provide rapid communications or all these other claims that they make, that these kind of things, the JJK Elite system can be connected to the JJK Connect system. And what this means is that it means you are never out of touch with your two-way radio users. The other networks, the other systems, they're only push-to-talk radios for over cellular. You can't cross over to the radio networks. Nope, not with the JJK Elite and the JJK Connect system, which we call JJK Elite X and JJK Connect X. They allow two-way radio users to cross over and talk to Elite users, so you are never out of touch with family, friends, or your business. Communications suffers, your business suffers. Not with JJK Communications. We can help out with there. Contact JJK Communications or visit them on their website, www.jjkcom.com. All righty. Well, we are back this week. Like I said, a little bit later. Sorry about that on there. But with it, we are going to dive into the actual boards themselves, as we said, because a lot of people aren't familiar with the different boards out there. A lot of people go and just want to buy this thing, be like an appliance operator, right? They go like, I want to buy this device and this and this and this, but then they don't realize it doesn't necessarily meet their needs, right? The neat thing about a hotspot is it brings you into a corner of your world. And what I mean by that is that if you don't have a DMR repeater near you, you don't have a P25 repeater near you, you don't have a Fusion repeater near you, or you do have this infrastructure near you, but, as we say, the people are using it, or it's tied up, or it's connected to a room, blah, 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 whatever the case may be. In those cases, in those scenarios, that ties things up. And when it ties things up like that, then we have issues on there. So hotspots bring it down to your own level that you can do it. Better yet, hotspots also allow you to take your system with you. If you are using a digital voice system and have connectivity out of that system, then you can take it with you. Example, I'll use a personal example. When I go traveling, alrighty, I like to talk to my Do Now network, the digital user network of Wisconsin. We can cross-connect all the moods, or like moods, well, the modes over, so that people won't be in a mood of saying, hey, we can only use one type of digital voice on there. And we, so we cross Fusion, DMR, P25, soon to have Nextel, and we do have some push to talk over cellular type connections on there. And with that being said, I like to be able to stay in touch. So guess what? I could take my hotspot device with me, sit in a hotel room, and while I'm sitting with this hotel room, wherever I may be or traveling, I could take a small device with me and do this and communicate and talk back. Or if I'm local and I'm like, hey, I want to talk into this repeater, they have a digital voice connection, you can do that. That's the great thing about hotspots on there. So without further ado, as I say, let's get into, and we're going to dive into each of these little things. So kind of keep a track on there, keep some notes on there, because we're going to cover a couple different hotspots, and let's jump right into it.
Alrighty, the first board we're going to talk about on today's episode is what we consider a simplex board. Now, the term simplex board can be somewhat confusing to people. And the reason it can be confusing to people is, in essence, what the term simplex means versus what the board can do. In this case, I'm going to use today's term as simplex, meaning it only has one antenna port. So as you can see on the screen there, it just has the one antenna port right there. Now, the reason I say that way is because, as you'll see later here, there are some boards which are duplex, meaning they're going to have two antenna ports on them. But, I want to stress this, just because it has one antenna port and we call it a simplex board does not mean that it can only operate on the same transmit and receive frequency. If you go back to our past episodes, we went along, we discussed on how you can put some boards into a duplex mode, or excuse me, the software into a duplex mode, but the board is maybe a simplex. So what we would mean by this case is that, like a radio, it transmits and receives split frequency if you want to. So, these are UHF boards. So maybe you have it on, 440.500 and then duplex it off at 445.500. So in other words, it may receive on one frequency but transmit on the other, but it can't do it simultaneously because it only has one antenna port right there. So this is what we call a simplex board. So kind of taking a look around the board, you'll see this top part here. This is the pin header area. This is the part that is going to plug in or on top of the Raspberry Pi. So if I grab one of my boards off the side over here, because I have a lot of Raspberry Pi boards, the board here, as you see, this is where the board would connect on the Raspberry Pi. Now I have it a little bit opposite. The board would turn around and the main part of the board would actually attach on to this part here. So this part of the board would be actually here. But since we're only talking about the hotspots here, we're not going to dive too much into this aspect on there. So the board here, this is where it would connect under. This is where it's going to get the pin or the power on the pins. This is where it's going to power up the board and everything on there. Now, I have a couple different boards here, like I said today. And as you'll see here, kind of some boards have light up based on the mode that you're using. So that's it right there. Little tiny LEDs, they glow up pretty well on there, you can see. This area that we're going to concentrate on next or talk about here is this area here and this area here. So on some simplex boards, it has the ability for you to attach either like an OLED, a TFT screen, a couple different things. It's all going to be dependent on firmware revision of the board, the capabilities of the board, and if your software, of course, that you're running, whether it be WPSD or Pi-Star, has it set up properly in there to put the data out onto there. It's a mixed bag of tricks, folks, when you're coming to some boards on there. Now, these simplex boards, very common, numerous different ones on there. If you're asking, what do I have those screws on there for? Well, what I did is that when it's sitting on top of the Raspberry Pi, I just got some plastic screws, like little project screws on there. These are 100% plastic. They are not metal in any way, shape, or form. And they just go through. I have it so it's kind of a standoff. So when I push the board down onto the pins here, the board doesn't kind of flop like, if you take a look at it, the board doesn't flop down like this. It kind of, with the screws, it keeps it kind of flat and pushed against electronics. It's just a thing that I like within there. But in this whole entire board here, it has all the components that you need to be able to use it for digital voice capability. It has an RF chip. It has a vocoder chip on there. Now, these vocoder chips and stuff like that on there, they're not actual like vocoder chips for using like a microphone or something. It is all done and integrated in between the vocoder chip and the RF chip on there. So keep that in mind. I like what I'm going to say. Simplex hotspots, I guess you can kind of call it, or there's single port antenna hotspots, which I sometimes like to call them better that way. On there is, offers you that ability to do that once again. So simple one on there, very common one a lot of people use to get in there, can run off a Raspberry Pi, whether it be a Pi 3, a Pi 4, a Pi 5. Once you start getting up to 4 and 5 with some of these boards, it's really almost overkill. You can even, on some, even use a Raspberry Pi 0 or a 02, depending on if you're which OS you're gonna run on there. So Pi-Star usually can run on the older boards, what's like the Pi Zero for these types of configurations. When you get WPSD, they tell you it's only going to run on a Pi 02, the second generation, because there's just not enough processing power on the Pi Zero. So things to keep in mind when using this on there. Once again, very simple, very easy to do. I have some simplex, or once again, single port antenna hotspots running around here that I use around my house. Very simple, very great. As you can see, very small footprint on there, very small footprint as compared to the Raspberry Pi. It's, like a third of the size of the Raspberry Pi, maybe half. But you can throw it in your bag, take your radio with you, and travel anywhere. Connectivity to the internet with these, once again, is always going to be based upon the Raspberry Pi because that runs the software. So, whether you have Wi-Fi on the Pi or whatever the case may be. But this is what we consider, quote unquote, a simplex hotspot, or like I kind of like to call it better, a single antenna port hotspot. Alrighty, our next, how do I want to say, well, once again, if we go by it, single port hotspot type device here, if the board is, this is actually a USB hotspot. So little bit of different configuration on there. So instead of having a row of headers, like on the single port or the simplex hotspot that plugs onto the Raspberry Pi board, what we're doing in this case is we're using a USB. Now, where does this change things up a little bit? Well, this changes things up in a little bit in that you can plug it into a computer. And now you can run software on a computer instead of having to use a Raspberry Pi. Now, this actually offers a little bit more flexibility and freedom for some, depending on there. So if you're, let's say, at work and you don't have an internet connection, you don't want to bring a Raspberry Pi in, do these kind of things. Now what you can go and do in this case is you can just take and boom, plug this into your computer at work on your USB if your computer allows you to do that on there, or run whatever you have to software, but it all plugs in via USB. So we eliminate that row of headers. Now what does that do? Well, that narrows the device a little bit more, allows you to put it in a little bit of a harder case. I don't know if you can hear me tapping. It's a little clear plastic case on this one for demonstration. But once again, same thing here. We have a ability to just have a single port antenna. We don't have a dual port antenna on there. So what does that mean for you as a user? Well, once again, you're either using the same frequency for transmit and receive, or if capable, your device then is going to have the ability to once again, a couple different factors there's on there, but maybe do what we call half duplex. once again, example, you have your Pi you have your Pi software or your WPSD software set up for 440.500 and then 445.500. So in other words, it would transmit on, let's say, 445.500, and then you would receive on 440.500. Does it make a difference? No. Do some people like duplex? Yes. Do you have to have duplex? No. So it all depends on your configuration here with it. Very simple, very easy. It does have not as many features per se as the actual hotspot, or excuse me, the actual like single full board that attaches to the hotspot on there. A little bit obviously a different design because it's much smaller, but once again, small design, USB antenna that can attach on there. Very easy, very nice to travel. This is another option in that realm of hotspot devices. Now, the next board we're going to be talking about is what we consider a duplex hotspot, or a 2 antenna port hotspot on here. So this really kind of takes that step up from that simplex hotspot. Now, one of the things I do want to kind of mention and caution on here, this is one type of duplex hotspot. This is the kind that JJK Communications sells, alrighty. But with this, it has more features. So there are some other duplex hotspots that are out there which are similar to that first hotspot we talked about today, which was the simplex hotspot, or the quote-unquote, and this is why I say it that way, single antenna port hotspot. Some of those actually would have 2 antennas on the sides on there, and then that turns it into a duplex hotspot. Now, you can't just slap an antenna port on there and turn a simplex into a duplex. No, it has to come with the way that the wire, that the RF chip is in there, is wired for receive and transmit on here. However, when you take a step up and go into a bigger board, and especially a 2-port or duplex hotspot, you are gaining quite a bit here. Alrighty, and that's why, if you even notice, there is different selections within Pi-Star and with WPSD on saying, hey, wait a minute here, this is a duplex hotspot, this is a simplex hotspot on there. Now, a couple things are really kind of going on the board here. We got obviously a few more chips here because bigger board, bigger features on there. I'll start out with the area here, right here. This is the area, once again, that attaches to your Raspberry Pi board on there. Now, notice all the pins aren't fully used down there. Yeah, in this case, because we only need some headers on the top and in essence, the bottom and the top of the GPIO pins. There's just those plugs that are on there for that. You don't need the whole thing. You don't need those pins on there, so that's why it's not fully populated on there. Another thing you're going to notice with like this one here is this, as I'm tapping the board too much, is this USB slot. So there's a USB slot on the board here. And the reason there is a USB slot on the board here is this can allow, via a connection with, like, let's say a USB cable. So it's not a USB-A, but you can plug the USB cable into here, and then you can plug the other end into your Raspberry Pi. Or if you want to, you can plug it into your computer running the software if you have the right drivers and all those kind of things like that on there. So you can kind of almost make it like a sort of like a board on there. But realistically, it's designed to be on top of the Raspberry Pi, but you do have that option on there. In addition, this USB can also perform firmware updates to the board. Because let me tell you something, when you start getting into these kind of devices, firmware updates are going to be needed. That's what's happening. It's not really radios anymore, they're computers. Well, so let me move this back up here a little bit more. But with that being said, we have a lot more better display on here. So on the side here, you'll see it will show like power, cost, PTT, all those kind of different digital modes that this board can do. Now, mind you, when we're talking about these boards, we're not talking about FM. FM's not in the realm here. You see good modes like, you know, P25, YSF, DMR, NextDen, and yeah, it does D-Star, PTT, COSS, and power on there. Now, in addition, you'll notice there's parts on the board here and some parts down here. This is where you can start to plug in displays. So, for example, this is an OLED output center here. There is OLED here. There is Nexton displays here. And this is like ST-Link for if you need to do updates or some other integration on there. So as you see, automatically with a duplex hotspot, you're getting a lot more on there. But once again, biggest thing here is you have 2 antenna ports. So what does that allow for on a hotspot device? Okay, what does that mean when you're in duplex? Well, it literally means that you got 2 advantages right away with the duplex hotspot. One, if you're using DMR, you can utilize both time slot 1 and time slot 2. So on a simplex hotspot, you're only allowed to utilize 1 time slot at a time. Okay. If you try keying up on time slot 1 and there's activity on time slot 2, it's not going to work because time slot 2 is active on there. However, with these duplex hotspots or 2 antenna port hotspots, you now have the ability for, once again, to receive as well as to transmit. And what this does is when it's receiving and transmit, you set, obviously, split frequency on there. So once again, you could do like 445.500 and 440.500, whatever. Sometimes for separation purposes, I may even go further. I may actually do a wide split. I may do like a 440 and a 449. It doesn't have to stay consistent to the actual normal 5 megahertz for like UHF or whatever the case may be. So that's what I do there, because then once again, I can utilize the 2 time slots. So while it is transmitting here, like maybe time slot 1 is transmitting, I can come in on time slot 2, talk, and I can hear what's going on. And because of these factors, it almost acts sort of like a mini repeater. So you have that functionality on there. It does offer you the ability to set it like sort of like simplex operation. You have to change that on there. But 9 times out of 10, what I tell people is if you're going to be using this device, you're going to have to set up in your Pi-Star, you're going to have to select duplex hotspot, and your mode is just going to default to it. So do a frequency spread on there. Think of a few things. These sometimes don't have the best. These sometimes don't have the best RF filtering chips on there. So one, I do not recommend, and any hotspot in general, I do not recommend going and in any way, shape, or form putting these into an amplifier or like outside external antennas or anything like that whatsoever. So definitely when you're doing this, use smaller antennas that are on there. Like here's an example. Here's a small UHF antenna that gets screwed right down onto the top there. I also have situations in customers that they have even gone so far to the point of saying, I'm using these duplex hotspots. I don't want the RF traveling all over the place. And then what they'll do is, let me show you here, another kind of great thing. This is JJK Communication provides all these too here for it. But these are, kind of showing on there. This is a dummy load for a SMA connector. So you can put a little dummy load connector on there, and then let me adjust the board here for you a little bit. This SMA dummy load connector right there for you screws right onto the top of that antenna there. And now you're not using an antenna with a gain. You could just throw that away. And then that is a very, very small mount on there. So some people like to do that. Once again, it all depends on what your specific purpose or usage is. Now, one of the things I'm going to tell you here, one of the cool things about this, ready, is that when you're using these types of hotspots on here, you sometimes have the ability, and JJK sells this on there with their 2 antenna or duplex hotspots. Some of these are capable of doing multi-band. So like this hotspot here right now is capable of doing VHF, UHF, 220, and 900. Once again, VHF, UHF, 220, 900. Now, it is optimized, okay, for UHF, but once again, you can do VHF, you can do 220, and you can do 900 megahertz. Once again, optimized for UHF operation. So that's kind of the kick up to the hotspots. Now, I'm going to show one more thing here real quick, which is not in the realm of a hotspot per se, but allows you to make a hotspot and make a more high-powered hotspot, which we kind of call a single frequency site. So let's look at that one here real quick. So this is our final device we're going to talk about today. Now, one of the things I want to say on here, as you kind of noticed, as we went up from the simplex or the single antenna hotspot to the USB hotspot to the full duplex or duplex hotspot or dual antenna hotspot to now this, there's been a level of increasing features and complexity to it. So this is not actually a hotspot per se. This is an MMDVM board that attaches on top of a Raspberry Pi. So once again, you see we have the headers along here. But if you notice, there's no antenna port. And the reason there's no antenna port is because this part here requires you to interface it into a radio. So you have to interface it. There's no RF on this board whatsoever. If you see there are two pots on here, some people are like, oh, wait, are those antenna pots? What are those like little dots there? Antenna? No, these are actual adjustment soft pots that are built into there. So what happens with this device here is you plug this into the Raspberry Pi once you've made your audio connections, and then this is going to interface into a radio. So it could interface into a mobile radio, and you run kind of a simplex hotspot. It could interface into two radios. So in essence, you make a repeater out of the two because this has a separate audio for receive and transmit, as well as core sense and PTT sense on here. You could interface it into a repeater. So there's a lot of different options that you have cooking with this board here. Now, once again, you have your light up aspects of what is going on with this device here right now. So, you know, what mode you're using on there. So, you know, for example, you know, you have your core sense, you know, once again, P25, DMR, you know, Fusion, Next-Gen, you know, D-Star, and, you know, all those things that are on there. So you have those lit up on the board there. You do have also two options here for the different types of you want to plug in here too. So you can have like this is a serial board. I think that's for an LCD screen on there. So you have those options that are in there too. So once again, you start building this up more and more and more and more features kind of come into play on here. It all depends on what you're going to do with it, how you want to wire it, depends on how it's going to be used. So the cabling that comes with it here, pretty simple standard cabling. It gives you a little JTAG connector. Let me flip it over here, make it a little bit better there for you. Little JTAG connector that kind of plugs into this part here, and then you have the color wiring, and there's manuals out there that tell you, you know, like this color is for this color is for this color is for this, and you can easily integrate it or wire it into whatever you need. Some people prefer this over using the little things because now when you're using a board like this, you can actually interface it into different types of radios and interfacing, right? Like before the other boards, it was a UHF radio on there, or the duplex went along and offered a little bit of a split on there where you can go do, you know, VHF, UHF, all those kind of things. But on the average, if you're buying one of these quote unquote commercial boards, meaning you buy it from someone, you know, like whether you buy it online or through a retailer or wherever you get it for, or whatever, a lot of those simplex boards are just in that single band, like they're only UHF. You don't see too many VHF simplex hotspots. You don't see 900 even really and stuff like that. Even there's some that even erase the antenna. This gives you that more freedom and option on there. Also, it can take your repeater setup into the next level, because unlike the other boards that can't do FM, this doesn't do FM. But as part of the setup here is that if an FM signal is detected, this board will deactivate and won't listen to the FM signal. Then your repeater can do what it needs to do, and then if it detects a digital signal, then it comes back into play here. So you now have this little bit of split ability on there for what it can and can't do. That is a big testament, I would say, to going and having a multi-mode repeater. Because if you, once again, repeaters are expensive, let's face it, right? And if you're getting a new repeater, you're like, okay, this and this, and I need this and this. And if you have a perfectly good repeater, but you want to go to the next era, you want to go to that digital era, Well, what can you do? What should you do? Well, guess what? This is going to now allow you to take and change this whole situation here, that you could still run and have your FM users while using this board and a Raspberry Pi, and also allow digital users to take part and take function with it by just adding a simple board. And I mean, I don't know about you, these are not that expensive. They are very versatile on there, you know, and it comes down to cost savings sometimes. Would you rather buy a new repeater in, you know, $1,500, da 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 da, or if your repeater is still good, even though it's analog and you want to go to the digital realm, this might be a solution for you on there. So while not technically a hotspot device, you can set it up as a hotspot device. And I've set it up on some different events and stuff that we've had here with our operations in the Do Now network, where we've had people that have said, you know, John, we have a coverage hole that wants to take place. We want people to use digital in there to get into there and stuff like that. They don't mind doing what we call an SFS, which is a single frequency site, meaning it's single frequency, transmit and receive, but then it has one of these devices in there that you can hook up to a radio, because you're not using a tiny little transmitter on top of the board that puts out maybe 10, 20 milliwatts. This you could hook up and you could put it to a radio that can do, you know, 25 watts, 50 watts, 100 watts, whatever the case may be. Just remember, you got to watch the duty cycle, okay, of that radio. But here we go. Now we have that option that is, you know, put into there, and things are good to go. So, while once again, not necessarily a hotspot, it is a device that allows you to create, in essence, a hotspot. Alrighty, the last thing we're going to talk about, because as I was talking about hotspots, I'm sure people are going to be like, John, I got questions, da 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 da. So I figured I'd touch on this. So here we see we have two different Raspberry Pis that are out there. This model here happens to be a Raspberry. If I look at the board here, this is a Raspberry Pi Model 3B Plus. This is a Raspberry Pi Zero, not a Zero 2, okay, because there's Raspberry Pi 0 and Raspberry Pi Zero 2. 2 is the second generation. And then for the Raspberry Pis, there's been different ones out there, like, you know, the 2, the 3, the 4, now the 5 out there, and all these processing power things. So it just kind of goes up and up in price. But these two things, they're going to go ahead and do the same thing. So as we talked about here, here's the headers where a MMDVM board would plug into it, or a hotspot, whether it be single frequency, or excuse me, single antenna, or duplex hotspot with dual antenna. This area right here is the spot they would plug in on there. This is not in a case. This is in a small little, nice little case for the Raspberry Pi Zero there too. Sometimes the Pi Zeros will come with or without the headers installed, so just keep that in the back of your mind there. But as you see here we have the setups. Both do the same thing on there. With the Raspberry Pi Zero, yeah, you do have USB ports on there. These are micro USB ports, and you have a HDMI mini, not an HDMI micro. On the Pi Zero, you have an HDMI full size, and then you have also here a micro. On the 4s, you go to an HDMI mini, and then these get replaced with USB-C connectors on there. Is there a difference between them? Yeah, there's a little bit more of a processing power. Like I said, Pi Star is going to run great on either of these boards on there. When you get up to WPSD, it's going to be a little bit more resource intensive, so you're going to have to go to Pi 3, which is a good, you know, fair middle of the road thing. But with the Zero here, you're definitely going to have to go up to a 2. It even states on there, it won't run on a Pi Zero. So you're going to do Pi Zero 2. States that right on the board there. That's not me. You know, here's your SD card slot for there. It's kind of built into this case here, so you got to pop the board out to get it out. And there's the SD card plugged right into there. Numerous different devices and cases and stuff like that out for the devices on there. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take real quick. I'm going to kind of pull those away, and I'm going to kind of show you an update of what we have been working on, or what JJK has been working on, that I've been following along on their progress here. And this is a Pi, in essence, 4. And you could tell because the 2s and the 3s had the Ethernet jack over here and the USB jacks over here. Okay, and I'll kind of just show you here. This is a Pi 3. So as you can kind of see on there, already. These are kind of, let me try to adjust into my screen there a little bit. But yeah, as you can see here, here's the header here's the header for the Pi 4 over here. Here the header is all the way right here. You kind of can't see it, but as you see, the jacks are reversed between the 3 and a 4, so some of the cases might be a little different on there. But getting back to this device here, as you can see, we have this set up on a Raspberry Pi 4. It is in a Raspberry Pi case. They were working on a customer modification. So here we have the duplex, or what we like to call dual antenna board on there, so they can run duplex, seated right on top of the Pi here. It's all kind of in a nice little case here. Kind of, let me see if I can actually turn it over here for you. Kind of, let me spin it around there like that. So as you can kind of see there, minus my working hands here. So there you can see, here's the side of it. You know, you're not going to use those speaker and the microphone jack, but here's what I was talking about, those USB mini HDMI. These are micro HDMIs. This is a USB-C on here, but very small and compact on it. They wanted the option on this one to have a Next 10 display plugged in. I should say, went along and modified it so that the Next 10 can click right on there. They could do an OLED there. They could do an OLED there. It's up to them, whatever they wanted to do. Now, on this one, to make it fit and work, they did modify it to, this is a board that did not come with the USB. So not all boards necessarily come with a USB jack on there. Not all boards come with the display on there. So that's kind of a nice thing that you have with some of this customization that takes place on there. So this is the Raspberry Pi setup on there for a Pi 4 with a duplex hotspot. And going back to it, like I said, here is the Raspberry Pi 3, once again, for our little demonstration and analogy. And then here is the Raspberry Pi 0 on there. So like I said, as you can see, different boards, different capabilities of what it can and can't run. Now, can you run a simplex or a single antenna hotspot on this Raspberry Pi? Yes. Can you do it here? Yes. A lot of this comes into the software being used. So I can't stress that enough, because I hear a lot of complaints. I see a lot of complaints, people saying, I got an old Raspberry Pi 2 board. Will that work? Well, yeah, no, it doesn't have as much processing as the 3. Definitely not as much as the 4 or the 5. Those really beat in there. But they're like, can I run it on a Raspberry Pi 0? And I'm like, well, yeah, you can. What are you running? WPSD. No, it's got to be a Pi 0 2. And let me clarify here. Usually it's the full Pis. I have heard stories about people running it like on an STM board, that kind of thing. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I haven't dug that deep into that in that regards. A lot of people do that more as an advanced kind of user thing, but I do see a lot of these questions, so that's why I wanted today's episode to focus on there. But that gives you a little sample of the Pis. Pis are really inexpensive. You could do a search on them. I mean, everything from, I've seen even Best Buy sell Raspberry Pis now. I've seen Micro Center sell them. I've seen computer places online, all those things. You just kind of got to shop around for the best price. But definitely think of what you're going to be using for a hotspot device. There's simplex, single antenna, duplex, dual antenna, and then what OS you're going to run, because that's going to determine whether you're going to be able to get by with a little small one like this, or you're going to have to go up to a 3, a 4, or a 5.
Alrighty, so thank you to JJK Communications for allowing us to show what this customer they're doing for that on there. Kind of gives you that, rounded picture here of all the different hotspots that are actually out there today and for usage. Like I said, lots of options out there for it. And it's really fun. But this is, like I said, part of this whole kind of series of shows here. There are some things that need to be done to it when you're setting it up correctly and what have you. So that's what you need to do, and you need to be aware of. You need to know what you also want to buy on there. But, real quick, it wouldn't be the show, as people said, if it didn't have this part here. It really bends my antenna. What really bends my antenna is the people that take a look at hotspots and think their way or only that way is the only hotspot that they should use. I've seen and I've gotten some comments, as I kind of alluded to earlier, about people saying you're doing hotspots wrong, you're doing a disservice, you're this and this and this and this. And I got to be honest with you, I don't think that I am in any way, shape, or form. Lots of people have different opinions. Lots of people have different ideas of how hotspots need to be run and set up. I think the biggest thing to understand is that the hotspot you use is going to be what works for you, right? If it's not working for you, if it's a device that's like, then guess what? Don't use it. Don't use it at all. All right. That's a really big thing to think about. That's a really big thing to consider because, once again, some devices are going to meet your needs and other devices are not going to meet your needs. Maybe you don't need a duplex or dual antenna hotspot, and you just need something that's going to plug right into your computer. You don't want to mess with the Raspberry Pi. You don't want to do anything like that whatsoever. It really is going to, once again, be up to you. So don't feel you are getting dragged into it. Don't feel that you, in essence, are tied into it, right? Don't go by that. Find out what you need on there. Now, the biggest thing, once again, about hotspots is taking a look at your needs and then determining what software you're going to feel comfortable with. Should you have to reload the software and do everything over and over and over again? No, you shouldn't. I hear a lot of people say that, oh, this and this and this and this. And usually what that means is that, they did something wrong on there. Like I hear some people saying, I always keep having to reload the Pi Star image. Well, I ask people, how are you turning off your hotspot then when you're done with it for today? Oh, I just unplug it. Oh, okay. Go ahead and do that with the computer, right? Go ahead and take your PC that you're using, and instead of clicking the start menu, shut down, or whatever OS you're using or something like that, just pull the power on it completely and see how long that's going to last on there. So there is some things that need to be done in that regards. So that's the biggest thing about doing these devices. The other thing too, which I got to go back and I got to stress, which we talked about, is keeping clean frequencies. If you have multiple Pi Star WPSD running devices, make sure they're not on the frequency as other devices. I have multiple devices here, hotspot devices in my house that I run. One for P25 specifically, one for DMR, one for Fusion, one for doing some tests with NextEn. Guess what? They're all separate frequencies, and they're all designed to not interfere with one another. John, how do you do that? Well, guess what? I have some that are running VHF, I have some that are running UHF, and then the ones that are in the same band with one another, I make sure that they are far enough away, or the bands far enough away from each other so that they don't run interference. There is a little bit of responsibility. With great hotspot usage comes great responsibility. That should be the new motto, right? So, with that being said, you have to think that thing through. But here's the best part. Contact someone. Reach out to someone. Contact me for that example. If you have questions about the hotspots or whatever, we're help out. Contact JJK Communications, which sponsors our show and does deal with hotspots. They are willing to help you on there, but they're also not going to give you their opinions. Don't get trapped into that thing where someone's going to give you opinion and their opinion is the only thing that you should listen to. No, don't. I always suggest that because there's going to be people who want to use devices in a certain manner that may not align with the way you use it. And just because person A's alignment or usage of a hotspot is not the same as person B's or alignment with the usage of a hotspot, doesn't mean that they have a better operation of hotspots than you. So keep those factors in mind when you're looking at all of this on there. Well, guess what? We've been on the board for almost 45 minutes here today. I appreciate everybody for tuning in, for listening. I know a lot of information came out there and stuff like that, but I hope it's worthwhile for you and everything. So with that, we're going to say have a good day, everybody. Take care. The weather is finally getting better. I know it doesn't seem like that, but it is actually finally getting better in some areas. So take care, everybody. Stay safe, and let's talk on the radio sometime, shall we?